The auditorium was packed, every seat filled with proud families, cameras ready, and eyes fixed on the stage. It was high school graduation, the kind of day meant for celebration, not confrontation. In the middle row, wearing his dress blues, sat Master Sergeant Daniel Ross. His chest bore 2 rows of medals earned from 20 years of service. But today, none of that mattered to him. Today was about his son, Tyler, walking across that stage. Daniel clutched the graduation program with calloused hands, his eyes misty. He hadn't seen Tyler in nearly a year, his last deployment had ended just 2 weeks earlier. But just as the principal began the opening remarks, 2 security guards approached Daniel from the side aisle. One tapped his shoulder firmly. "Sir," the guard said under his breath. "We need you to come with us." Daniel looked confused. "Is something wrong?" The other guard motioned. "You're making some of the guests uncomfortable. You weren't on the reserved list. Let's step outside." Murmurs started to rise nearby. Daniel remained seated. "I'm here for my son. I have an invitation. I'm not leaving." The guards tightened their stance, clearly ready to escalate. And that's when it happened. A subtle shift in the air. 3 men seated 2 rows ahead slowly stood up, quiet, composed, wearing suits. Their presence commanded attention. They weren't just guests. They were U.S. Navy SEALs. The 3 men moved with the kind of quiet authority that didn't require raised voices or threatening gestures. They didn't need to announce who they were, their posture, their presence, and the way others instinctively stepped aside said it all. The tallest of them, a broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair, turned to the guards calmly. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice low but firm, "is there a reason you're interrupting a decorated Marine during his son's graduation?" One of the guards stiffened. "Sir, we were informed there was an unregistered guest in this row. We're just following protocol." Another SEAL stepped forward, pulling out a small badge from inside his jacket. "You're not following protocol. You're causing a disruption. That man has every right to be here, more than most. If there's a problem, you'll address it with the superintendent, not with intimidation." Daniel, still seated, looked up in surprise. He didn't recognize the men, but he could tell by their calm assertiveness they were more than just concerned guests. The guard hesitated, now realizing the situation was no longer in his control. He glanced nervously toward the back of the auditorium, where the head of security stood frozen, watching the standoff unfold. Families nearby had stopped paying attention to the stage. All eyes were now on this quiet showdown in the center rows. Then the 3rd SEAL leaned down toward Daniel and said just loud enough for others to hear, "Master Sergeant Ross, on behalf of those who've served alongside you, we've got your 6. Daniel's throat tightened. He didn't even know who these men were, but in that moment, it didn't matter. The lead SEAL then turned back to the guards. "You will let him stay. You will return to your post. Or you'll explain to the superintendent why you tried to remove a Marine veteran from his son's milestone moment." The guards hesitated, then slowly backed off. Silence rippled through the crowd, not out of fear, but out of respect. What had started as an uncomfortable encounter had just turned into something unforgettable. And the ceremony hadn't even truly begun yet. Tyler stood backstage, shifting nervously in his gown. He'd been dreaming of this day for months, the day he'd finally make his father proud by walking that stage, diploma in hand. But something felt off. He heard the low murmurs from the crowd. A disruption. His gut twisted. He peeked through the heavy curtain just in time to see 2 security guards backing away from a cluster of suited men. Then his eyes locked onto one man. The Marine uniform was unmistakable, even from a distance. "Dad." Tyler's breath caught in his chest. He hadn't known if his father would even make it. The last letter had been uncertain, something about a delay, a missed flight, maybe a change in deployment orders. But here he was. Sitting right in the center of the room. And people had tried to kick him out. Back in the audience, Daniel sat silently again. He'd straightened his shoulders, his gaze locked forward. Around him, whispers swirled like wine through dry leaves, but the seals stood at ease nearby, one on each side, like silent sentinels. The principal, shaken but determined, finally returned to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored today to welcome not only our graduating class but also the brave men and women who have served this country, some of whom are joining us in the audience. There was polite applause, but it lacked energy. The room was still processing what had just happened. Then came the names. One by one, students walked the stage. Cheers. Applause. Smiles. And then, Tyler Ross. The room froze for a split second. Tyler stepped out, his chin high, eyes already misting. From his seat, Daniel rose slowly, not to cause a scene, but because he had to. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled a small salute. Tyler stopped halfway across the stage and saluted back. It was unscripted. Raw. Real. The crowd, silent for several seconds, suddenly erupted, not with casual claps, but with thunderous applause, cheers, and a few standing ovations. Parents, teachers, even the principal wiped away tears. And through it all, the seals stood still. Not because they were ordered to. But because respect didn't require motion. It simply required presence. Tyler clutched his diploma as he stepped down from the stage, still reeling from the moment. He'd imagined this walk in his head 1,000 times, but nothing could have prepared him for what actually happened. As he made his way back to his seat, he didn't go to his classmates. Instead, he turned straight toward the center row. Daniel stood waiting, his eyes glassy but proud. The applause was still going as Tyler rushed into his father's arms. The auditorium watched in reverent silence as the two embraced, not just as father and son, but as two men who had both sacrificed, struggled, and survived. One parent nearby whispered to another, "That's the kind of moment you don't forget." The seals who had stepped in earlier quietly returned to their seats. No victory laps. No recognition needed. They had done what needed to be done, nothing more. But the impact lingered. After the ceremony, as the crowd filtered out into the warm afternoon sun, Daniel and Tyler stood by the steps of the auditorium. A few people came up, teachers, fellow parents, even students, to shake Daniel's hand or say thank you. One elderly teacher approached with tears in her eyes. "I don't know what those guards were thinking," she said. "But I'm so glad you stayed. That moment between you and your son, it reminded everyone what this day is really about." Daniel nodded humbly. "It was never about me. I just didn't want to miss my boy's day." That's when the seals approached one last time. The leader extended his hand. "Master Sergeant Ross," he said, "what happened in there, it never should have. But just so you know, we don't leave our own behind. Not on the battlefield, and not in auditoriums." Daniel shook his hand firmly. "I appreciate that. More than you know." Tyler looked at them all, his father, the seals, the crowd still buzzing, and something shifted inside him. He wasn't just proud of his diploma. He was proud of where he came from. The parking lot was nearly empty now. The banners had begun to sag. The crowd had thinned out. But for Daniel and Tyler, the moment still hung heavy in the air, not like a burden, but like a weight of honor. As they walked toward Daniel's old pickup, father and son didn't speak at first. They didn't need to. Finally, Tyler broke the silence. "Dad, were you really going to leave if they made you?" Daniel paused by the passenger door. "Yeah," he said. "I didn't want to ruin your moment. But I wasn't going to argue in front of all those families." Tyler shook his head. "I would have walked off that stage." Daniel looked at him, surprised. "You being there, that meant more to me than a diploma ever could." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, not from anger but from pride. "You earned that diploma," he said. "But today? You earned something else, too. Tyler raised an eyebrow. What's that? Daniel smiled. The respect of warriors. Just then, a low rumble echoed across the lot, a sleek black SUV pulling up beside them. The window rolled down, and the lead seal from earlier leaned out. We meant what we said, he called. If you ever need anything, Tyler, or you, Master Sergeant, you let us know. Thank you, Daniel replied. The seal gave a small nod. Semper Fi. Semper Fi, Daniel returned, and the SUV rolled away. As it disappeared down the street, Tyler asked, So, are all your friends that intense? Daniel chuckled. You have no idea. They both laughed, tension finally breaking like a long-held breath. In that single afternoon, a father stood his ground, a son stood tall, and a room full of strangers remembered what integrity looked like. Not through confrontation, but through quiet strength. And respect earned in silence. Later that evening, the Ross family gathered at a modest backyard barbecue thrown together at the last minute. Friends, neighbors, a few teachers, and even 2 of the SEALs dropped by, not as soldiers, but simply as men who respected what they'd witnessed. Tyler stood by the grill, still wearing part of his graduation gown, though the cap was long gone. Daniel sat nearby, plate in hand, watching his son laugh with classmates. It had been a long time since he'd seen Tyler that relaxed. One of the SEALs, Chief Barrett, the tall, broad-shouldered one, walked over with a soda in his hand and nodded toward Tyler. You know, he said to Daniel, a lot of kids his age would have let that moment pass. Just keep walking, let security handle it. Daniel nodded. He's not most kids. No, Barrett said. He's not. That salute on stage. That wasn't for show. That was instinct. That was respect. Daniel looked at the fire pit quietly crackling behind them. Funny thing is, I spent my whole career worrying that I missed too many birthdays, too many holidays. Thought I was too hard on him. Thought I was just a shadow in the background. Barrett looked at him directly. He didn't see a shadow. He saw a foundation. Daniel didn't say anything, his throat tightened again, same as it had in the auditorium. But this time, it wasn't from confrontation. It was from peace. Across the yard, Tyler held up a small speaker, music starting to fill the air. He called out, all right, no more speeches, just good food and bad dancing. Laughter erupted. Daniel grinned, stood up, and tossed his paper plate in the trash. As he walked toward the crowd, he felt something different. He hadn't just shown up for his son. He'd helped show an entire room what dignity looked like. And somehow, without trying, he'd given his son the one lesson that couldn't be taught from books, drills, or even the battlefield, that real strength doesn't shout. It stands. Quietly. Unshakably. And sometimes, just sometimes, it changes everything. A week after the graduation, the story had quietly gone viral, not from a news crew, not from a press release, but from a single cell phone video posted by a student sitting a few rows behind Daniel. The clip was just under 2 minutes. It started with the guards confronting Daniel. Then, the subtle rise of the SEALs. And finally, the emotional salute between father and son, framed by roaring applause. The video didn't need flashy editing or commentary. The rawness spoke for itself. Within days, it had been shared thousands of times across platforms, captioned with phrases like, "This is what honor looks like." They tried to remove a Marine dad. The SEALs weren't having it. One of the most powerful moments I've ever seen at a graduation. Daniel had no idea until Tyler showed him on his phone. Dad, you're a viral hero now. Daniel raised an eyebrow. A what? Tyler laughed. People are talking about you like you're Captain America. Some vet support groups even started tagging you. They want to send a gift. Daniel shook his head. I didn't do anything heroic. Tyler put the phone down and looked at his father. That's the thing. You just showed up. And when you were asked to leave, you didn't raise your voice. You didn't swing. You just stood your ground. That's exactly why it hit people. Daniel thought about that for a moment, then gave a quiet nod. The next day, Daniel received a formal letter from the school board, a written apology signed by the superintendent, praising his service and promising updated training for their security personnel. But even more meaningful than the apology, a handwritten card from a junior student who had watched everything unfold from the upper balcony. It read, "Dear Mr. Ross, I've never seen anything like that before. I didn't know what real courage looked like until that day. Thank you for showing us." Daniel read the card twice, then slipped it into a frame next to his medals. It would never make the headlines. But for him, it meant more than all of them. Months passed. The summer gave way to autumn, and life settled back into its normal rhythm. Tyler had started college on a partial scholarship, and Daniel had returned to his civilian job at the local VA office. But something had changed, not just between father and son, but in the small town itself. At the next school board meeting, the auditorium was filled again, not for a graduation, but for a vote. On the agenda, the official recognition of Sergeant Daniel Ross and the addition of a new annual award for graduating seniors. The Ross Honor Award for integrity, quiet strength, and unwavering dedication to family and service. Daniel didn't want to speak. But Tyler nudged him. "You stood your ground for me," he whispered. "Now I think it's your turn." Daniel stepped up to the microphone, hands steady, voice calm. "I didn't ask for attention that day," he began. "And I didn't expect backup. But what I saw, what all of you saw, was the power of standing up for what's right, without yelling, without violence, just by refusing to back down when it matters." He looked out at the students, teachers, even the guards who were now present in the crowd, humbled, trained, and changed. "Let that be the legacy," Daniel said. "Not what I did, but what all of us learned from it." The entire room stood in silence, not because they were told to, but because it felt right. And as Daniel stepped away from the podium, Tyler greeted him with that same salute from graduation day. Only this time, Daniel didn't return it alone. One by one, members of the crowd, veterans, teachers, even a few students, raised their hands to their brows. A silent wave of respect. It wasn't planned. It wasn't rehearsed. But it would be remembered forever. A few weeks after the school board meeting, Daniel received a package in the mail. It had no return address, just a single line written on the outside, "For the man who reminded the world what honor looks like." Inside was a neatly folded American flag, encased in glass, with a brass plaque at the bottom, presented to Master Sergeant Daniel Ross, for exemplary conduct under pressure and for reminding a nation that strength is measured not in force, but in dignity. Tucked beneath the flag was a small envelope containing a handwritten note from Chief Barrett, one of the SEALs who had stood up that day. "We've stood beside warriors on every continent, in every kind of storm. But what you did, standing alone, without backup, that took a different kind of courage. You didn't just stand for your son. You stood for every father who ever had to prove they belonged in a room that should have welcomed them from the start." Daniel sat quietly for several minutes, the note trembling slightly in his hand. The weight of it all, not the honor, but the realization that something so personal had resonated with so many, finally hit him fully. Across town, a mural had been commissioned by a local veteran youth program. It depicted Tyler on the graduation stage mid-salute, with Daniel in the crowd, standing tall in his dress blues. Above them were the words, "Stand quietly. Stand strong." The artist, a young Marine widow and mother of two, said the image was inspired not by power, but by poise. And it didn't stop there. Schools across the state began revisiting their security training protocols for public ceremonies. A statewide bill was proposed, nicknamed the Ross Provision, that would require school districts to provide military family sensitivity training for public event staff. It passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. Daniel didn't seek the spotlight, but it kept finding him. At one small-town radio station interview, the host asked, "What do you want people to take away from what happened?" Daniel paused for a long moment before answering. "I want fathers to know they matter," he said. "Even when no one seems to notice. Even when the room tries to push you out. Stay. Show up. Be still. Because sometimes, that's louder than anything." The clip aired once, and then took off. Tyler, now studying pre-law with a minor in public policy, saved that audio to his phone. Every now and then, when college got hard or life got noisy, he'd replay it. Not because his dad was famous now, but because in that moment, his father had become his compass. The following spring, Tyler was invited to speak at the high school's next graduation ceremony, this time, as a former student, a freshman scholar, and someone whose name had quietly become synonymous with resilience. As he stood at the podium, dressed not in a cap and gown, but in a sharp blazer and tie, the crowd leaned in. He scanned the audience and found his father, Daniel, sitting proudly in the front row. "Last year," Tyler began, "something unexpected happened in this very room. Some of you were here. Some of you probably saw the video online. But today isn't about going viral. It's about something much deeper." He took a deep breath. "That moment, when my father stood his ground, taught me more than any textbook ever could. I realized that sometimes, you don't have to raise your voice to change a room. You just have to refuse to sit down when it matters most." The students listened. So did the parents. Even the staff, including the same security team from the previous year, stood at attention, not out of obligation, but out of respect. Tyler continued. "I watched people try to make space smaller for someone they didn't understand. But then I saw others, brave enough to stand beside him, make the room bigger. That's the lesson: when you see something wrong, stand beside what's right. No matter who's watching." He paused. "And Dad, I know I said this before, but thank you. You didn't just show up. You showed me how to stand." The audience erupted in applause, some rising to their feet, others wiping away tears. Even the principal, who had once stood awkwardly silent during that chaotic moment the year before, now led the standing ovation. After the ceremony, students approached Tyler and Daniel both, some with questions, some with gratitude, and some with tears. One young girl clutched her grandfather's hand as she approached Daniel. "He was scared to come today," she said. "He served too. Thought maybe people would stare. But I showed him your story. And he came." Daniel knelt down slightly to meet the old man's eyes. They didn't say much. Just nodded, as if speaking in a language only those who've worn the uniform understand. That summer, Daniel was honored at a state veterans banquet. But instead of accepting the spotlight alone, he requested that Tyler be recognized alongside him. "For teaching me," he said, "that sometimes our greatest legacies come from those watching us quietly, waiting to see how we react when it's hard." Years later, long after the story faded from headlines, the impact remained. The Ross Honor Award became a statewide tradition. The mural still stood, untouched, undisturbed, flowers often placed beneath it on graduation day. And in homes across the country, when fathers felt invisible, they remembered the Marine who stayed seated. The SEALs who stood beside him. And the son who saluted in front of the world. Because real strength isn't loud. Real honor doesn't beg for attention. And real legacy? It lives in the moments that make a room go silent, because respect walked in, and refused to walk out. Years had passed. Tyler was now in his final year of law school. Sharp, focused, and driven, but still grounded in the memory of that unforgettable day when everything changed. The day a room full of strangers tried to push his father out, and ended up witnessing the quiet rise of something far more powerful than outrage, unshakable dignity. Daniel, now retired from public service, spent his days mentoring young veterans, guiding them through transitions that often felt overwhelming. He never once brought up what had happened at the graduation, not unless someone asked. And even then, he downplayed it. It was just a misunderstanding, he'd say. I didn't do anything special. But those who had seen it, really seen it, knew better. That moment had sparked something across the country. Not a movement. Not a trend. But a quiet shift in how people viewed presence, service, and the sacred bond between a parent and their child. Each year, when graduation season returned, people reposted the old video. New students discovered it. And inevitably, someone would write, I want to be the kind of person who would stand like that. Or the kind who would stand next to him. The school eventually created a permanent display in the auditorium's entrance, a bronze plaque beneath a still image of Tyler mid-salute, and Daniel rising to return it. Engraved were the words, strength needs no permission. Respect asks for no spotlight. Love never stands down. On the 10-year anniversary of that moment, the school hosted a reunion. Daniel, a bit slower on his feet but no less sharp in his gaze, arrived quietly. He didn't expect a ceremony, just a handshake, a few kind words. Instead, as he entered the same auditorium, the entire room stood. This time, there were no guards. No confrontation. Just applause, rising, wave after wave, not for viral fame, but for the man who had, without saying a word, taught an entire generation what it meant to show up when it mattered most. Tyler stepped onto the stage, this time as the keynote speaker and now a civil rights attorney. He didn't prepare a long speech. He didn't need one. He looked at his father. And then said to the crowd, some people make noise to prove they belong. My dad. He sat still, and the whole world listened. The room once again went silent. And in that silence, legacy echoed. Forever.